Welcome to the Corporate Training Academy series for sustainable training. My goal is to give you one topic each week to consider putting into action in your workplace, or perhaps to compare with how you and your team do business now. I look forward to hearing your thoughts about the idea. Make it once, use it multiple times in multiple ways. This video will talk about the lesson plans and how I use them. Download the template that you'll find above in the blog now. As we discussed in the previous videos, sustainable training is being able to maintain a consistently high standard of output, storing your materials well so that they can be reused and repurposed. And for training to be sustainable, there needs to be organisation-wide, repeatable, efficient and effective processes and systems to maintain training support. Lesson plans are a tool for sustainable training. Do you use lesson plans? I never did. As an academic, I used to just create the lesson. I'd have PowerPoints and notes, some videos and some probing questions, some handouts, some flowcharts. I knew how it worked and I got on with it. The next year I'd look at my subject outline, the lesson, research it to update it, no problems, my show, my stuff. That's pretty much how academia works. Then I joined corporate education and training and I had to use other people's material quite a bit and I found this really frustrating. There were PowerPoints with no notes, the handouts were often misplaced. I couldn't work out how it all fit together. Then occasionally I'd work with the notes of a professional and organised trainer who had it all together, and that was a huge relief. So I started using lesson plans to show the big picture roadmap of a lesson I conducted, so I could easily use the session again, and so can anyone else. Let's look at an example. If you haven't downloaded the template from corporatetrainingacademy.org, pause this and do it now. Then you can just make some notes on the template as we go through it. There are loads of versions of lesson plans available. However, if you're delivering training that's accredited by an external body, for example in Australia, if you're running an RTO course, use the version they provide because that's the one they're going to audit. That's really important. I like this particular version because it's designed in chronological order and that kind of works for my brain. Lesson topic. Sometimes you'll have a specific course code or lesson name. Other times you'll need to write the business needing you're actually addressing. The level of the topic, you would normally circle the one that's most relevant. It's important because it will tell other trainers the level of knowledge, expertise and interaction they might be able to expect, or in fact has been assumed when the course was developed. I use subtopics because I'm a big believer in bite-sized or modularised learning. This means being able to create activities and short sessions around very specific activities so that I can repackage them or deliver them in a short session when necessary. The number of participants relates directly to your room size and your timings. It's usually shown in a range of minimum, and a large class will always take longer than a smaller class. Most suitable for is your intended audience. For example, I might say experienced caseworkers, novice call centre staff, complaints manager, first-time supervisor. So sometimes it's about a job description, other times it's around a skill set. The author is useful to know so that you can clarify any misunderstandings and also gives credit where credit's due. How long should the training take given the methods outlined in this lesson plan? You may have designed this lesson to take 3 hours, and actually with different methodologies it could be done in an hour. It just explains the link between the timing and methodologies. Make sure that you note very clearly where you've stored the electronic versions of all of the materials and make sure you've named them in such a way that you'll find them again. Timing can be quite general or quite specific depending on the nature of the content and the lesson length. It's best to have clear guides about the progress to encourage self-checks, for example, complete module 1 within 25 minutes or before the first break. Give yourself some solid signposts. It's surprisingly easy to lose track of time. Also make sure the activities are timed, including debrief and feedback, which is often neglected in the planning. Please don't ever do your timings by sitting in front of the computer and reading through your materials. It needs to be much more than that because you want to create training that actually involves your learners and expects that so much of it will come from the room, and that takes a lot longer than you giving information. The sequence of learning objectives or outcomes is what you want learners to be able to do, understand, because of the lesson. It should relate directly to the business need you're addressing. Remember, the focus on corporate learning is workplace application. How will this activity help you do your job? Specific content areas might be an action or it might be about the subjects you're covering. So an action could be something like introductions, relevance statement. And by relevance statement, it's the big statement you make at the beginning of every training session that says, here's what's in this for you. It gets their attention. You might also list actions like warm-ups, discussing expectations, energizers, reflections, training transfer activity, those things that are actual actions as opposed to subject specifics will be entwined throughout the day. Mostly though, this column is going to be around specific content areas, topics and subtopics, so that anybody who reads your lesson plan gets a good idea of the order in which that you deal with these issues. Remembering this is your lesson plan and probably the very last thing that you do, you will have already designed your training methodology and created your tools. So this is your signpost of the order of the day for yourself and anyone else who uses the materials later. Your instructional design is already done, so this is a thumbnail of how you'll facilitate this learning objective, delivering this content in a way that engages and challenges the learner. What instructional strategies are you using? Some examples might be probing questions to the larger group. The responses are written on the whiteboard and referred to again in Module 3, for example. Or you may have set up some simulations, for example, resuscitation, interviewing a mock candidate, or making a flat white. This is where you list the resources you're going to use for each part of your session. So for example, in the Energizer, you might need butcher's paper and pens, or a handout, or some prop. For the second part of the lesson, you might need PowerPoints 2 through to 15, or case studies 1 and 2, or video regarding Sue. Give the names of the electronic copies of these tools some real thought and store them in such a way that they are linked to this lesson or to this learning outcome so that you can find them again later. Assessment and indicators of understanding will depend largely on the purpose of the lesson and your requirements for assessment. Sometimes a probing question or a clarification of some of the more critical learning steps would be sufficient to gauge progress. Other lessons actually require competency through written assessment or observed performance. You need to note here if that's the case and make sure that those compliance assessment elements are very clear. Usually though, assessment in corporate education is mainly about check-ins to monitor progress and understanding and allow moments of feedback. Debriefing of activities fits here, and debriefing activities needs to be planned and timed into each lesson. This is where the real learning happens from each other and from the sharing of what has been learned during the activities. So here's one I prepared earlier. You can see I use cumulative time, so I know the second session should take about 20 minutes and be finished 25 minutes into the lesson. I worked with people who created their lesson plans for a particular session. So let's say it started at 8 o'clock. The first session would say 8 to 8:05. However, it's a bit off-putting when you want to reuse the materials for another session. So it makes more sense to me to just note the timings rather than allocate it to a particular time of the day. I also like to modularize the learning so I can reuse smaller bits. For example, I could do a 30-minute session based on this lesson plan, and it would be around the topic of understanding the impact of stress. And I could use that smaller session in a number of different ways because I have the learning outcome, the specific content area, the learning strategy, the resources, and the assessment for that all ready to go. A quick word of warning, just as we said with PowerPoints, lesson plans are not a substitute for excellent instructional design. They are simply where you write down the skeleton of the lesson with links to the resources and notes on teaching methodologies. Resist the temptation to create a lesson plan and then create the training. This is likely to lead to teaching people what you think they need to know, which is often a long way from creating sessions that wow staff, support learning and improve performance, making the workplace better. So do you want to know more about instructional design? Check out the instructional design checklist for corporate trainers using adding. Stay focused, save time, and the bonus is the bold stuff they don't tell you in textbooks. It's free, and if you sign up in our blog, you'll also get Tuesday training thoughts and videos. So get involved. So the questions I leave you with are lesson plans. Have you ever tried to use other people's materials and found it a bit of a puzzle? Have you ever tried to use your own materials and found them a bit of a puzzle? Do you find lesson plans help you to make decisions about reusing and repackaging your materials, or is that something new? How do you use lesson plans in your workplace, or how do you want to use them in the future? Make it once, use it multiple times in multiple ways. Create better outcomes faster with sustainable training practices. Was this useful? I hope so. Leave a comment, share the video. Use it to start a conversation with your team or use it to train other staff. I look forward to working with you through the series.